Ever wonder if we're actually programmed to age? If there's some kind of biological clock hidden deep inside us, just counting down? Well, today we're diving right into that mystery. It's a story that starts in a lab over 60 years ago and takes us all the way to the very, very ends of our DNA.
So, let's start with the big question that scientists were chasing for decades. Is there a literal, physical clock inside our cells that says how long they get to live? The answer, as it turns out, is a huge yes. And how it works is, honestly, more clever and complicated than you might think.
Okay, so the first clue in this whole mystery comes from a basic limit that's stamped on pretty much every cell in your body. It turns out our cells can't just go on forever. They've got a built-in expiration date.
And that expiration date is tied to a specific number. For most of our regular cells, that number is right around 50. They can divide and replenish our tissues about 50 times, and then that's it. They just stop.
This whole phenomenon, it's called the Hayflick limit. See, back in 1961, a scientist named Leonard Hayflick figured out that cells weren't immortal, which is what a lot of people thought at the time. Nope, they had this finite limit. And this was a game changer, because it proved that cellular aging wasn't just random wear and tear. It was controlled as some kind of internal, pre-programmed countdown. So the next logical question was, what's actually doing the counting? What's the clock?
All right, to find that ticking clock, we got to zoom way in. I mean, past the cell itself, past the nucleus, and all the way to the very tips of our chromosomes, because that's where we find the physical fuse for the Hayflick limit.
And here they are. Meet the telomeres. These are these little protective caps made of a repeating DNA sequence, just TTAGG over and over. The absolute best way to think about them is like the little plastic tips on your shoelaces, right? They don't have any important genetic code themselves, but they stop the really important part, the shoelace, your chromosome, from unraveling every time the cell divides.
So how does this whole countdown timer work? Well, it's surprisingly simple. Every single time a cell divides, the machinery that copies our DNA can't quite get to the very, very end of the chromosome. This means a tiny piece of that protective telomere cap gets lost. It just gets snipped off. With every division, that fuse gets a little bit shorter, and shorter, and shorter, until after about 50 divisions, the telomeres get critically short. The cell senses that its vital DNA is now exposed and in danger, so it hits the emergency brake and enters a state of permanent retirement called senescence. It's done. It will never divide again. And that, right there, is the Hayflick limit in action.
But what if the story didn't have to end there? What if you could actually rebuild that fuse? This is where our biological mystery takes a really dramatic turn, with the discovery of what some people basically call an immortality enzyme. So, in 1985, a couple of researchers, Elizabeth Blackburn and Carol Greeter, made an absolutely incredible discovery, work that would go on to win them the Nobel Prize. They found an enzyme that could fight back against this shortening process, a little molecular machine that can actually rebuild the telomeres.
And they called this enzyme telomerase. Its whole job is to add those TTAGG repeats back onto the ends of the chromosomes. It literally rewinds the cellular clock, letting cells blow right past the Hayflick limit and keep on dividing. So think about that. We have a biological clock, but our bodies also have the key to reset it. But, and this is a huge but, this incredible power comes with a really serious catch. And that brings us to this massive paradox. On the one hand, telomerase is kind of like a fountain of youth. It's active in our stem cells, letting them divide over and over to repair tissues and keep us going. But on the other hand, it can be a pathway to total disaster. You see, cancer's main goal is just to divide uncontrollably, and to do that, over 90% of cancers switch on telomerase. It gives them cellular immortality, letting them completely ignore the Hayflick limit and grow into deadly tumors. So the very same tool that our body uses for regeneration can also be used to fuel its destruction. It's a classic double-edged sword.
So far, we've been looking at all this internal drama happening inside ourselves. But this story isn't just pre-programmed from birth. Our lives, our experiences, and especially our stress levels, can actually reach into our cells and make that clock tick faster. And look, this isn't just a feeling. The link is direct, it's biological. As these researchers put it so clearly, chronic psychological stress causes real physical damage to our telomeres. Our minds can literally speed up the aging of our cells. The question is, how?
Okay, here's how that connection works. When you're stressed out, your body releases hormones that basically put your cells on high alert. This creates a lot of damaging byproducts. You can think of it like cellular exhaust that basically acts like rust inside our bodies. And this rust is especially good at damaging our telomeres. It chews them up directly, and it blocks our repair enzyme telomerase from doing its job. This, of course, leads to shorter telomeres and more of those retired senescent cells, which then cause inflammation. And here's the kicker. That inflammation creates even more cellular stress, which locks our bodies into this vicious feedback loop where stress speeds up aging, and that aging creates even more stress.
Now, I know that might sound a little bit grim, but the last and maybe the most important part of this whole story is that this process isn't totally out of our control. We are not just helpless passengers watching our own cellular clocks wind down. We can actually influence them.
Yeah, study after study has shown that our lifestyle choices are a huge factor here. Things we hear about all the time, right? A balanced diet, getting regular exercise, and finding real effective ways to manage our stress. All of these things have been directly linked to having healthier, longer telomeres. Our daily habits are constantly sending signals to our cells, either protecting those crucial little caps or speeding up their decline. So in the end, it's a really powerful way to look at it. Our telomeres are more than just a biological clock. They're like a living record. They carry the sum total of our life story, our stress, our habits, our resilience. The science shows us the mechanism, but it leaves all of us with a deeply personal question. What story are you writing at the very ends of your DNA?